Hello, hello.
Hey, how was your trip?
So far, so good.
Oh, you still
How are
there?
you doing?
You still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I thought you had come back already.
Oh no, I'm here. Like I'm gonna be here.
And you're not gonna bring us along?
Of course, that's part of my goal is to bring everyone along. I'm just waiting. I know quite a few more people registered, so I'm just gonna give them a second to join. Um, and here they are. Lots of folks popping into the waiting room now.
And thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm just really glad that people are interested. Um, with everything that is going on right now, it feels like looking at the existing love letters that we've received from the ancestors, it almost for me feels like a religious exploration. I know I said last week that it's kind of feels a little bit like a Bible study, but there's so many ways that as we'll go through some of the quotes that I pulled for this week. Um, I'm glowing. Yeah, it's been really good to be home. I do have to say it's really feels good. When we were Imar and I were just going out to grab something from the store and the neighbor came over and was like, "Hey, is everything okay? Like I came over yesterday to check on you and make sure you were okay and you didn't answer the door." And it's just it's just been surreal a little bit, like feeling like I'm just plugged right back into my village. The house that I'm in, my uncle lived in for 30 years.
Oh wow.
So, like a lot of people know him. Like it's like, there's just a huge welcoming energy that we've been received with. And just, like I was saying about this rereading of The Wretched of the Earth has really felt like, you know, those folks that were living through that 60s, late 50s, 60s era of lots of the Caribbean and Latin American and Pan-African revolutions and liberations, their analysis of decolonialism and their wisdom for this particular moment. Like there were so many things. I'm really, really eager and interested to hear what you all thought about these two chapters against the backdrop of what is happening in the United States. And so I'm going to share my slides to get started. But just because my team has reminded me, I'm Dania Davy. I'm an attorney by training. Just a little bit more background for the folks who haven't been attending all of the WTFs. I started my career at the Land Loss Prevention Project. I've been the director of land retention and advocacy at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. I served on the North Carolina Local Sustainable Food Advisory Council. I've done a ton of federal policy advocacy work, pretty much every farm bill since 2008. I've worked on equity advocacy. And so this moment of seeing what is happening with the federal funding freezes, the federal government shutdown, as someone who has been in this work for a really long time, I think I started Land and Liberation to kind of help bring the temperature down a little bit for folks who are newer to the world of land and food justice, because there's so many ways that this particular iteration of fascism is a textbook of not just what we've seen before in Farm Bill years, but I think I said it last year when we started having, when I started the newsletter, was just that there's always something huge happens with the federal government in a farm bill reauthorization year. And that has a lot to do actually with decoloniality and the role that US imperialism plays in undermining the liberation independence of the nations that are surrounding, and obviously that is as a way of increasing the markets for American farmers, but there are just so many ways in which it ties in immigration policy and also the themes that we have around, the religious, the white Christian nationalist rhetoric around what a nation state looks like is very closely tied to those folks who do a ton of missionary work in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so reading The Wretched of the Earth at a time like this, for me, it feels like those folks that were documenting all of the liberation struggles and realities of the late 50s, early 60s. They were really giving us clues. They realized that the revolutionary world that they were building towards, they likely wouldn't experience the fruit of their labor. But these writings, this book in particular, is one that reminds us that these are not new tactics. These are tactics that are as old as, the end of colonial empire itself, and what we're all experiencing in the modern era United Statesian context is, I think that the way that I read these two chapters this time was there's so many ways in which the folks living in the United States do not realize that they're still colonists. There's actually just camps or tribes of colonists that have never experienced decolonization. And so as we jump into these two chapters, I'm really excited to hear and eager to hear what you all's reflections are. But before we jump into all of that, I would love to invite someone who wants to kick us off with a grounding. And for those of you newer to the space, a grounding can be a poem, a prayer, a breathing exercise. It's really just anything that helps you and others enter into this space, because there's so much going on. We just want to bring our attention to this present moment.
Hi, Danielle. It's Donna. Um, so I apologize. I couldn't hear you because I was trying to see if one of my coworkers, if I sent him a link, if he could log in. And so I didn't hear you. Were you asking us to do something?
Oh, I was just inviting if there was anyone that wanted to share a grounding, whether it's a prayer or a poem or a breath exercise. I usually just kind of open up the opportunity for anyone who feels so moved to share their voice in
I
this moment.
apologize, but I kind of missed that. I thought that's what you were saying, but you said you were home. Where are you? Did you move?
Yeah, oh,
Where was
I'm back home
I?
in Jamaica. I'm
Oh,
I'm not in I'm not on the the location of my family land. I was sharing with those who were on earlier that I'm living in the home that my uncle, actually my grand uncle, my father's uncle, lived in for 30 years before I moved here. And so it's just been really interesting being back home and experiencing, the things that I think there were so many misconceptions that I had as someone who's been in the United States for almost my entire life, that it's just been really interesting. This isn't.
Mm-mm.
Sorry, I had to mute you. I was looking for, I bought a book for Mr. Zippert's wife. She had poems, and so I was gonna try and see. Maybe I'll save it for next week though, because I rearranged things and I can't find the book. Are you there?
I'm here. I'm sorry. I lost service for a second, but if I think Donna, you were saying that you'll share something next week or next time.
My machine froze. I apologize. So that sounds exciting. I'm so excited for you.
It has been really exciting. It's been really good. A part of why I'm here is that one of the farms that I support is called Solidarity Yard, and it's about 30 minutes away from where I am right now. And it is a space that is being stewarded for survivors of gender-based violence. I see that my internet's unstable, so I'm going to turn off my camera for a second. But it is a safe haven and an active working farm that is a safe place for survivors of gender-based violence on the island. And so I am kind of co-hosting some learning exchanges between organizers and the EJ and all of the food and land justice spaces in the US with farmers and EJ and other types of organizers here at home. And next week, I'll actually be at a reparations conference that's being hosted at the University of West Indies. So um, I hit the ground running, and there's been a lot of good that has hit me back. So yeah, it's been awesome. Annette, I see you pulling up chicken soup. Are you going to share something with us?
Yes, I will.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
as chickens, I knew I had some book somewhere around this big pile of stuff. It's Chicken Soup for the Gardener Soul. And I'm just gonna read The Man Who Lived in a Box. It's just like two sentences. Treat a person as B is, and B he will remain as he is. Treat him as he could be, and he will become what he should be. A quote by Jimmy Johnson. And I think it's just very appropriate I turn to that quote today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annette. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I I felt like when I was going to the book this week, I was like, man, I really hope I don't like lose everyone because this was definitely like an intense read, and a very, very intense read this week. But I'm hoping that if you didn't get a chance to read it, or even if you didn't get a chance to listen to the audiobook version, you'll be inspired by this conversation to go back and revisit, because it actually kind of does tie in that quote, Annette. It really, these two chapters really turn the microscope back in on us, those of us who are doing the work of um, leading the movement and stewarding the transition to the new world. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation? Can I get a thumbs up from someone? Okay, awesome, cool. So we're going into the first two chapters. Last week, we spent a lot of time in the preface of Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. And as I was preparing for this week, and I was thinking, something that Ashay said last week really stuck out to me. And it was, the WTF space has been a space that's for farmers, for small scale farmers, land stewards, and the folks that work at the various advocacy organizations, nonprofit organizations that support those folks. And so when you're making a book like The Wretched of the Earth, which, as we heard from a lot of the folks who were in the space last week, like it's pretty much something that is studied at the college level. Usually, if you are in political science or a sociology or an international development type of course of study, this is kind of one of the first books that everyone is introduced to. But if you haven't gone to college or been in one of those very specialized fields of study, you might never have come across The Wretched of the Earth. And so it's kind of like, why bring this book written by a psychiatrist at the point of Pan-African and Latin and Caribbean liberation struggles in 1961? What does that have to do with the issues that America's small scale producers and land stewards are facing today? And I'm hoping for anyone that left last week's session, that came to this week's session with that question, that we'll get some of those answers in the first couple chapters. But Frantz Fanon, I think, because he was not just a political scientist and a philosopher, I think the fact that he was a psychiatrist is a really, really, really useful frame for us to be studying during this particular time, because I cannot think of very many people that I know right now that are not experiencing some kind of crisis of the political climate. I mean, we have seen in Chicago, we have seen in DC, we've seen all over the nation, US military and ICE forces being turned against not just, folks who are undocumented, but US citizens themselves. And so when we think about an analysis of why decolonization is so important, and it's a step that cannot be skipped. And unfortunately, many of the nations around the world, especially the United States, are functioning under this idea that we have somehow shifted into a post-colony reality, in the same way that when Barack Obama was elected president, we were told we were shifting into a post-racial reality. The idea that we have moved beyond the colony is something that I don't think has been critically analyzed. And because of that, we now have a lot of political factions that have only figured out how to exploit and extract from rural peoples when it suits their political goals, but have never actually integrated or incorporated the experience of, as the Marxists and Fanon calls the folks of the countryside, the masses. And so when we think about what Sartre wrote in the preface about the rural masses being the real revolutionaries, we hear that again in these chapters from Frantz Fanon. And it's important, especially now in the era of social media activism, when there's so many folks who are social media influencers and presenting themselves as farmers, presenting themselves as urban farmers, as rural dwellers, but really using the lexicon of rural communities and agricultural communities to participate in political cycles like the Farm Bill. That's part of how we can see that our decolonization process has never fully been completed for those who live in the United States and for the West, mostly, right? So there's so many themes in chapters 1 and 2 of The Wretched of the Earth that I hope were really resonant for us, especially right now in this moment where we're seeing the relics of the colonial powers, that we can really see that there is a way forward and there is a new world, and we are actively building it together. So I pulled up a quote because it was the first to jump out at me. And Fanon writes, national liberation, national renaissance, the restoration of nationhood to the people, commonwealth, whatever may be the headings used or the new formulas introduced, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. And I didn't just pull it out because Adama referenced Commonwealth last week, last time. I pulled it out because of that last phrase, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. And I'm just interested to hear from folks what you think about that phrase. Is decolonization always a violent phenomenon? Don't all jump in at once. And if you're somewhere that you can't come off of mute and you're able to put your answer in the chat, I'll be happy to read those out. But what do folks think? Can we have decolonization without violence? Is that possible?
So I'm gonna jump on real quick. I am in the company, but I'm here too. Um, I don't think so. I don't think so because I don't I think those that are like profiting from the colonial empire are not just gonna walk away. So I think it will come down to a force of will. I think multiple strategies, but violence is still definitely on the table.
Yeah, and I mean, Fanon lays this point out very like he goes in, like he like actually like paints the picture of exactly how the violence plays out. And I agree with you, Adama. I think that there are there are there are multiple roles within the revolution. And Donna says that she also agrees. And I definitely think that part of why Fanon lays it out in that language is that he wants us to also remember that, you know, when the United States Constitution was written, there were human beings that were legally classified as property, right? And this is the case of all of the nations that were participants in the transatlantic slave trade. To quote Fanon, the thing which has been colonized becomes man during the same process by which it frees itself. And so if you are going to transition you know, like if you're going to transcend the scientific definition of you know, states from animal to person or object to person, it's going to take some significant rupture. And that rupture within the colonial paradigm is going to manifest in some version of violence. And I think that Fanon also kind of helps us see that like the entire colonial activity is one of violence. There's really like it's the entire project is violent. And so even just healing that, even just undoing some of that damage is going to result in an experience of violence within the system. So I definitely agree. And the next quote that I pulled of what Fanon wrote was the last shall be first, and the first last. And for some of you all that grew up in a Christian context, this might sound familiar. This might be something that you've heard outside of an academic setting, reading a book like The Wretched of the Earth. But this is something that is within the narrative of, you know, the Bible redemption story, right? That's a part of the promise of the promised land or the life after the Advent, right? That there's going to be this transformation of state from folks who have been the oppressed to transcending that state and being the first. And so because of that, Fanon further says that there's really not a reconciliation that can happen because you have folks that are functioning within a paradigm where I thought this quote was one that's really useful to think about. Fanon says that there are folks who are using the framework that the cause is the consequence, right? So the cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. This is why Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched every time we have to do with the colonial problem. So the Marxist framework, because it's something that a lot of us don't study about in high school in the US, it's something that only if you take certain college classes will you even be exposed to Marx theory. Marx is really just looking at class warfare. So Marx is a European analyzing the stratification of society based on class, exclusively on class. But we know that in the West, in particular in the United Statesian context, we know that class was used to make race permanent. So at the time that there were indentured laborers that happened to be European, there was a big problem with policing of their behaviors and getting them to not run away from their indentured contracts. And so by creating this categorization of Blackness and applying that to Africans and saying that you are a slave because you are Black, you are Black because you are a slave, when you designate race on top of class, as has been the experience of those of us who participated in the transatlantic slave trade, you can't just take a strict class or economic analysis. Your economic analysis is always going to be flavored with race. And that's why Fanon talks about stretching Marx's analysis when we're talking about the colonial problem. And this is one that we're seeing so much right now, right? All of these dog whistles. You have to show that the totalitarian character of colonial exploitation, so the settler, which we still have settlers right now. As a matter of fact, the entire US immigration process is being redone to ensure that South African settlers can participate fully, most fully, having spots within our immigration process set aside for a new wave of settlers. It's really important when you're trying to have settler identity conditioned and connected to the motherland. In this case, the United States is its own colonial empire, even though it's also functioning within a colonial paradigm under the British Empire. One of the first projects that the British and the United Statesians had to accomplish in their identity formation was painting the native as a sort of quintessence of evil. So when Fanon and Sartre and others writing in this era are talking about the native, they are not just talking about indigenous folks to the Americas. They're talking about all of those colonized peoples who were indigenous to their particular nations of origin before being transported, displaced into the colonial project. So we've seen this many, many times that the native has to be framed as evil. In the United States context, indigenous peoples have to be seen as their health and the disappearance and murder of indigenous women in the United States have to be framed as something that's a problem of and from and by that community. The violence that African Americans live under within the United States have to be framed as, that thing that we hear. Well, if they didn't run, they wouldn't have gotten shot. If they had nothing to hide, they would have just let the police arrest them, right? So even when we're seeing human rights abuses within the United Statesian context, we've already been conditioned to see the native as the definition of evil, not worthy of human rights. And when I was in law school, part of why Project 2025 didn't surprise or scare me was that I went to law school with people who literally would be in class and not saying devil's advocate, not couching it as devil's advocate, but saying things like immigrants should not have human rights. If they want human rights, they should stay in their own country. That's a quote of someone from a class that I was in law school. And so this construct that's deeply ingrained and embedded in the post-colonial nation state is that the native is essentially evil. But what's interesting is that one of the first things that has to disappear when we're thinking about what the revolution could look like and what the new world could look like, one of the first things that has to disappear is individualism. And I find this to be so interesting, and I'm just curious to hear what folks think about the role of individualism, especially because neoliberalism, most of us on these calls in general, I think are around, well, some of us are younger than the 80s, but probably about half of us remember like the past 40 years and the neoliberal process that we've watched unfold has really privileged the individual. So self-care and cancel culture and you having your rights above and beyond what's best for your community is something that has been seen as a virtue or a value. And that's part of what the Christian nationalists have kind of gotten right in their revolution, is that they've recognized that coordinating the group, especially the group that feels that they're not being heard, and having them feel that their individualism is less important than what's best for the group has been a part of their success in the past couple of years. So just curious if there are any thoughts or reflections that folks have about individualism being the first thing to disappear in moving towards revolution.
I just want to say something real quick and to go back to the settler and native. I was just thinking, I mentioned the book, How the Irish Became White. And I was thinking, people like Kavanaugh, who's in the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure if his family came over from the Irish famine or they were Scots Irish. I don't know the timeline. But when I think of people like him against immigration, and yet these Irish people, especially the famine, because there were Irish here before, but especially those that came through a famine and now against immigration, to me, it doesn't make sense. And then I think when you said you went back to the settlers' mind and colonialism, then I went, yeah, that makes sense. That's where they are. And so they don't want to help others come in regardless of their nationality or race.
Absolutely. And, the Irish, I could go down a rabbit hole on the Irish. And a thing is that the Irish have been so brutalized by their colonizers. They've had their entire Aboriginal culture, for the most part, their Aboriginal language, practices completely erased. They're pretty, they got really close to a full erasure of their indigenous language and practices. And so when I think about the appeal of assimilation for someone who is rich, they come to US and they can get treated with dignity and respect as a human being. Of course, I mean, like that's like, yeah, like I think that that's the lore and the appeal that Fanon talks about later in the book about, when basic decency, like it's like the conversation about the male loneliness epidemic right now, and women are like, men that just don't cheat. It's like that's a catch. It's like the men are so not willing to shed the patriarchal learnings that they've gotten in the past, that now women that want to be in partnership and relationship with men are just like, he's kind. Like that is like a major thing. And so similarly, whenever a person or a group is oppressed and they feel that they have limited options to access the things that would give them their version of freedom, liberation, or independence, I think it's very human to want to accept that inclusion and acceptance. And then the question for us as we build a new world is, how do we do that without automatically othering people? Because that quote that I shared about the person who said that if immigrants wanted human rights, they should stay in their own country, that was an African American woman from the South that said that to me.
Oh,
And
never mind.
so I think the appeal of, of nationhood is something that it's really attractive to lots of people, and lots of groups of people can fall for that rhetoric.
I've heard that too about African Americans, and they think when Africans or the diaspora come over, that they have not lived as African Americans and enslaved. But I'm like, if you are so hip to the African movement, then you should open your arms to our African diaspora people. I've never figured that out why they don't do it.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard, and going to the book, it's funny that we there were it's like everything you say or everything that is someone shares, there's a quote in the book for that. So, you know, Fanon talks about the native intellectual. That's actually right where the next slide was, the native intellectual versus the people. And this is that same thing, the talented 10th, the people that are supposed to go leave their community and get educated. I think there are direct parallels between African Americans who are seeking to give their children a better life in communities, going and assimilating into communities that don't necessarily look like and share the values of their community, and taking on some of that rhetoric. And one of the challenges of the Native intellectual, so the Black person, myself, as the person who went to US and is now coming home, Fanon says that the Native intellectual overstresses details and thereby comes to forget that the defeat of colonialism is the real object of the struggle. And that made me think so much about the infighting amongst organizations and groups for resources and letting the actual colonial empire remain intact, unaffected, because folks are just vying for proximity towards the levers of power within the colonial paradigm and not creating new worlds, new realities, new nations that actually address the fundamental needs of the people. And Fanon says that the people, which I'm the people, right? Like I feel like I'm the people. So the people take their stand from the start on the broad and inclusive positions of bread and the land. How can we obtain the land and eat bread? And this obstinate point of view of the masses, which may seem shrunken and limited, is in the end the most worthwhile and the most efficient mode of procedure. And in decolonial Marxism, in my course that I taught earlier this year, What to Expect When You're Expecting Fascism, a question that I come back to often for all peoples who have survived colonization. Are the things that your labor is producing improving the quality of life of the people in your community? Because a lot of us have jobs that sort of lessen the impacts of poverty or oppression, but don't actually fundamentally uproot or shift in any way the way that the colonial empire functions. Selena shares in the chat, individualism is related to self-preservation. It erases our entanglement with each other. Can't go far alone. We experience different aspects of this oppression, and we can piece together ourselves with each other to work towards our liberation. 100% exclamation mark. Couldn't agree with you more. Is there anything else you'd like to come off mute and share, Selena?
Not at the moment. I have really bad Wi-Fi and I just got off of another call. I'm enjoying hearing the conversation. Yeah, I'm really open to hear other people's take on it too, since I came in a little bit late. But thank you for the invitation, Dania.
Oh yeah, no, of course. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you. And you know, I think that there there are ways in which, you know, a lot of the work that I do, I'm always organizing. I think if I think about what my work is, um, I'm really an organizer, whether that's organizing donors, funders, elected officials, community groups. I think that my, you know, lane in the movement is organizing. And I think one of the things that reminds me of just the practice of organizing, like that's something that I'm really hoping more folks will get back interested in. It's never compensated. Organizing work is just not compensated. And especially under this particular political climate that we're in, I definitely think we're going to see fewer jobs that could even be a proxy for organizing. But when you're organizing, one of the things that you get the front seat view of is what the actual needs are of the people on the ground. And that for me has been the most instructive wisdom in all of the legislative lobbying work and advocacy work that I've done over the course of my career. I remember when the Federation was working with American Universities, Anti-Racist Policy and Research Center to have the Racial Equity Summit for the Farm Bill a couple years ago. And I was helping work with members of the Federation to be their own advocates. So we went to DC and we were going to have this congressional briefing. And, I was like, I'm passing the mic to you farmers, you heirs property landowners, you members of the affected community, because that is the voice that is the most important in doing advocacy and policy work. And so when folks that are in those spaces start to hear how much they have in common, how much the same oppressive forces are directly impacting. Now, there may be a degree of impact that's different, and definitely the history of impact is different, and the consequences of those impacts are different. But fundamentally, those peoples who are the masses, the people, they are living the truth of what oppression and the colonial empire is seeking to take from all of us. And they're just not getting any of the benefits. They're not able to, they don't have a law degree. And so they can't just go into court and represent someone in the way that I carry that privilege as a Native elite person. And I think that a lot of what I'm observing in this particular political climate, I've mentioned before, Warnock is my elected, like he's Raphael Warnock represents me, I'm his constituent. And I've gone to DC many times and never been able to speak to someone from his office. I write letters every week. I think I've mentioned this on WTF before. I set aside time to do advocacy at the state and federal level of the folks who report to me. My taxes pay their salary. And very rarely, if at all, do I ever get a response from Warnock's office. And so I bring that up to bring up the reality that the representative democracy system that is in place, there's so many folks who are complacent about dollars are the equivalent of votes, that it's really not listening to the needs of the peoples on the ground at all. Like I don't even like, I don't know if you all saw that the US has been bombing Venezuela and has pretty much is trying to start a war in this region, primarily because the economy is not doing really well, and wars are money makers for a colonial empire. And so, the fact that Venezuela has oil and tons of natural resources, the fact that the United States really needs a win right now, needs an enemy right now to boost its economy, there are actions being taken right in front of us, in addition to financing a genocide, in addition to participating in multiple aggressive warfare acts in various parts of this country. The reality is that they're looking for a new enemy in this particular moment, to galvanize their peoples, to galvanize the groupings. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves whether this elected representation system that we have, the folks that we've put in office, you would think with midterms, they'd be answering every phone call and returning every letter. But they're actually, many of the offices are functioning as if they don't have accountability to their constituency. And that's kind of what Fanon is talking about the Native elite, is that they're so focused on assimilating into the existing power structure that they are completely not able to imagine the possibility of what accountability looks like with the people. And one of the things that Fanon writes about is that in North Africa and West Africa, there were systems for resolving disputes, and those were public ways of resolving disputes. And I think that some of what we're going to have to figure out as we're building a new world, when we're thinking about the accountability of those peoples who would represent us in terms of making policy, in terms of doing the things that get tax dollars appropriated adequately to our communities and not going to wars and genocides and things that we wouldn't want our tax dollars to go to. We have to answer that question of what accountability is going to look like, because our current systems of accountability are not rising up to meet this moment. And that's, and 1961, Fanon was writing that they weren't going to, they weren't going to be able to do that because they've never been decolonized. And so the closest thing that they can do is to be neutral. And I was cracking up because he says any study of the colonial world should take into consideration the phenomena of dance and of possession. And I don't know if anyone saw that description where he talked about dance and possession, but he literally talks about like we're moving through society as if it's a dance. Like we're participating, we're going to work, we're getting our coffee, we're swiping our debit card, we're driving our cars, we're like doing the choreography of liberation and independence, but it's not actually rising to the level of being independent. And so that made me think a lot about this moment where folks are just like frozen, and not, and pointing the finger. Our federal government is literally shut down right now. There are nutrition programs, there are farm subsidies, there are conservation programs that will not continue to disperse resources to the communities that we care about. And our Native elite or our elected officials are just doing the dance of going to work every day and sitting down, and talking to the press, but not doing anything to respond to the phone calls and letters and protests that the people are lifting up. Any reflections or thoughts coming up for anyone around those points from Fanon? And Annette, I see that you put A Colony and a Nation by Chris Hayes as a good read.
So it's a Dhamma, and I actually took that literally because of many traditional African religions have dance and possession. And actually, before the Haitian Revolution, there was a ceremony to invoke possession of the Loa. So, and I read it as sort of like a mechanism to relieve the pressure of the tension that happens And so it's a cultural way of, like I said, being a pressure cook, relieving the pressure under the pressure cooker that allows, people to continue to exist in a sense. And so I appreciate the broader perspective of that, because I feel like that right now, like, how is people just, moving through their life like everything is normal? Like, it's not. It's really not. So, yeah, thanks. That's it.
Adama, I too, I too, my first thought when I was reading it, I had to read it a couple times because I too, everyone knows, I mean, WTF really was just an opportunity for me to play soca and dance with my friends. And if you've never experienced carnival, um, or if you've never experienced any kind of ritual dance space that is connected to liberation and connected to our African ancestors. The line dances, hello, Annette. Yes, that boots on the ground. I mean, the fans, all of that. But when you're participating in, there is my favorite part of Carnival is this event called Juve. And it's like the party that starts at like 3 a.m. on like the Sunday morning, I think, before Carnival. Um, and you're up early in the morning. You get paint, they put paint on you, like there's paint, there's oil, there's water, there's baby powder. Just kind of you're like making yourself look like a spirit. um, and then we're just like dancing and parading. And that's part of one of the rituals that our ancestors participated in. And here in particular, the Mile, I've mentioned before, the Mile, the faith of the Maroons, the first African faith that was practiced here in Jamaica. They have a lot of dance and possession practices where folks can commune with the spiritual realm in and through dance. And so I also took it, Adama, as like fanon, being of the failed French colony, probably also has the African ritual dance frame of reference. And so it's in that same way of being like it's the duality of like, yes, it to understand it is to understand the subversive dance practices of liberation, but then also the role that dance plays in the choreography of our lives and the capacity that some folks have to just kind of go through the choreography of our lives if they're connected from the spiritual reality of what dance can mean and can look like for your culture, because dance is one of those things that is very, very different from one culture to the next. Like the body posture, the hand movements, the facial expressions, like it's drastically different from one culture to the next. And so that's why it can be a very effective tool of communication amongst subversive groups. And I think that was part of like within segregation, why it was so important for those celebratory dance spaces to be segregated because they didn't want folks being able to communicate and speak language that the colonial power didn't have complete authority and lockdown and control over. So yeah, I took it both ways as well. I just put in the chat and connections to the drums and rhythms and all their meetings. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking a lot, especially like what we're experiencing right now, because I'm nerding out. I'm gonna use the phrase, the techno feudalism. Oh my goodness. Like reading this book in light of techno-feudalism. So feudalism, quick history refresher, feudalism is like the state that most indigenous peoples enjoy, right? It's pretty much like before colonization practices, when people are just like living in relationship to the land. And yeah, there might be like some kind of king or some kind of structure where there's a monarch, but that is usually a distant monarch that is not on the land controlling and telling you how to use and access it. So the peasants, the masses, the peoples, within the Marx paradigm, those people are enjoying the land, and their labor and the products of their labor, and they're not having to necessarily have an overseer directly supervising them. And that's what the internet has become, a space where what's being colonized is not our manual labor, our physical labor, but it's our attention and our focus on all these, on this like unsupervised space. So if we think of the internet as like the equivalent of land, then we're all kind of sharing it, we're all kind of stewarding it in the same way of feudalism in the Middle Ages, right? So what these techno-feudalist autocrats are doing right now is they're like, hey, we can be monarchs. We can consolidate all media, all social media, all access to information, and then all of the everybody else, the peasants who've become dependent on the internet in the same way that we were, yeah, the internet is our feudal land. See how I can nerd out on this stuff? Like, yes, the internet space is the non-physical feudal land that the techno-feudal autocrats are trying to colonize. And that's why it's so important that the internet is becoming increasingly used just for the purposes of propaganda, like all of the AI, all the deep fakes, all the misinformation, all of the ways in which now we're starting to like not trust Signal or Meta or WhatsApp or any of the things. Exactly. Well, the land's not evil, but the internet might be. But yeah, the land, in the same way that we're dependent on the land, we are now dependent in so many ways on the internet for basic communication. And Mara's school now is on the internet, right? So like these are the realities of the modern era. And so what this form of colonialism that we're all experiencing while experiencing the possibility of decolonization of the physical land, we're now entering into a new colonial state. So that's why I wanted us to read Wretched of the Earth. Because we all are farmers or supporting farmers. So we have the wisdom of how to defeat empire on the physical realm. So we have to figure out what we're going to do to organize and convene strategies for the technocrat takeover. That is challenge of our time. And that is why when Asada was saying that the revolution, like everyone is expecting the revolution to be like, I need a machine gun. I mean, some of us might, like some of us might, but it's not gonna look like Fidel Castro's revolution. I think a lot of people have been waiting for that. When are we going to go live on the mountainside and have our guns ready? And that may be part of it. That might be the violence. That I'm only a nerd who studies nerds who came before me and then sees the connections because of being in deep relationship to stewards of the land between the feudalism on the physical and feudalism in the technology realm and the political realm. And so for me, when I look at what Fanon says about Ita, when the grid goes down, so do we, just like this pollution of the land. The reason environmental justice I'm going to turn my camera back off because my internet is a little unstable. The environmental justice and are so singularly important to Pan-Africanists and Latin America and the Caribbean right now. And the reason that so many of our Latin American, Caribbean, and African cousins and kin are fighting so hard for Palestine is that is that is the last visual representation of what empire will do to enact genocide on our lives. What they're going to do next is try to undermine our human relationships. And if they can uproot our capacity to trust in human relationship, that's the technology, right? That's the way to ensure. Thanks for being here, Adama. Glad that you joined us while you could, and see you next time. That is part of what we have to be preparing our folks for. And one thing that we're seeing in this moment that we as Native elites have not done a good job of is explaining to the masses why things are happening and what's happening and what's going to happen next. Because we've spent so much time fixated on how to win neoliberal checkers that we haven't taken the lessons from the revolutionaries who were under very different conditions than we are, fighting a very different revolution. We're still fighting the same decolonization war. And that is what Fanon is talking about when he says there is very easily brought into being a kind of class of affranchised slaves or slaves who are individually free. Oh my God, y'all. When Fanon said that, I was like, yo, this is the college debt. This is the mortgage debt. This is the medical debt. Like, we're all franchised slaves who are individually free. And that's the reality that our revolution has brought us to this point of trying to navigate. Um, and so, he says again, in the colonial countries, the peasants alone are legendary, for they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. But colonialism is not a thinking machine, nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it will only yield when confronted with greater violence. And then he goes in several examples of successful revolutions. And that was the other reason why those of us who come to book club, I'm hoping that we will share some of the things that we discuss in this space with others, because if we're not bringing these conversations back, like here it is, this amazing book has all this information, has pretty much a playbook and a game plan for how we can educate everyone in our community about what the decolonization will require us to go through before we can defeat the techno-feudal autocrats. This book is our why I said in the beginning, it's almost like our Bible, because I don't have to know how to tell the future to be able to tell you that Fanon foretold exactly what we're enduring right now in 1961. Like, we can show people books like these that were written decades ago that predicted exactly what is happening. Because I think that's a big piece of why folks are so beholden to religion, as prophecy, being able to have prophetic gifts and anticipate things that are going to happen and educate people about that. One thing that religion does is it exploits their emotions around it. So we have to find ways that are non-extractive of educating folks and bringing them along this journey that we're on. But Fanon gives us examples to study. He talks about Vietnam. He talks about the 1954 revolution of the colonized peoples in Vietnam. So that's an example. He talks about Algeria. He talks about, what's that a picture of, Annette?
Keep talking. Sorry, keep
Oh,
talking.
sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, he gives us Algeria as an example. I really love the Portugal example. He talks about what happened in Latin America. He talks about Fidel Castro. The Portugal example I love, and several of the Latin American revolutions I love, because those folks were going into the countryside and setting up little schools, like just like how we have that Liberation School, oh my goodness, Highland Center. Just like how we have Highland Center, all the Portuguese revolutionaries, the Guyanese revolutionaries, the Colombian, Venezuelan, I mean, pretty much all of Latin America and the Caribbean had these revolutionary people who, instead of, they could have been lots of things. They could have worked at the UN or worked at, moved to America and worked on the stock market or whatever, because they were highly educated people, doctors, lawyers, engineers. But they chose to use political education as the way of bringing their rural communities along with them, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to go represent you. I'm going to be a part of the delegation, and then I'll come back and tell you what happened. They were like, no, like we can't try to have our nation state function the same way that the colonial powers function, because we built that. We and our land and our suboil, our subsoil, our soil, our blood, sweat, and tears built the opulence of Europe. And we have to get a wealth redistribution to be able to function like them. But what we can do right now, our revolution can literally be setting up these little small schools, little micro schools in rural communities, and helping every single member of that community understand the game. And that's one of the things that the Dems don't want to do. The Dems want to just make fun of folks who are in MAGA or think they're superior to them, talk badly about folks from Appalachia. And I'm not saying that I defend or stand racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, any of it. But what I'm saying is that when folks from urban centers think that rural places don't deserve or don't have the capacity to participate in political education, you get the exact conditions that Fanon warned us about. Fanon told us that when those abject generational poor people are given the opportunity to fight for the revolution or fight for the colonial power, they're going to choose the colonial power if the revolutionaries never bothered them about the plan, because they understand violence, they understand that colonialism is violence. Yes, Jude, La Via Campesina, love them. They do that. They're a part of that legacy of work, of educating folks, peasants that are ready to be a part of the revolution. But so many native elites think that rural people are beneath them, in the sense that they're just not going to understand some of these concepts. And I hear it with folks who go and visit the Federation all the time. I hear folks who come from urban settings going to the Federation, and they just don't have a positive impression of people who live their realities in the rural deep South, especially the realities that many of those folks are conservative. And so to those of us who would rather cancel conservatives who live in rural communities because we don't think that we can politically educate them to come along with us to the revolution, we're going to go fight the revolution and then tell them to come along. Why wouldn't they align themselves with the oppressor? Why wouldn't they align themselves with the folks that look like they're quote unquote winning the cultural and political wars? What incentive do they have to join the revolution? if revolutionaries aren't making it their calling to give them the political education to understand what Fanon was telling us was going to happen in 1961. Come on in, Annette.
Oh, I mean, it just blew me away. But when you said Appalachia, and I'm thinking about that book, White Trash, and I think about how most people in Appalachia are poor. They ran away, had slaves that ran away, so they intermarried. But it's like, we're going to use you for your coal. We're going to get rid of all your, clean water and clean air for coal. But at the same time, you're going to get black lung. But yeah, we're going to give you some opiates. So it's it's like genocide in real time, and people don't understand that because you're in an industry where you're going to get black lung, get rid of clean air, clean water, poor people. Oh, we can have poor people more, so you introduce them opiates. And instead of, educating, like you said, and I mentioned this years ago that we needed freedom schools because I went through South Carolina Progressive Network and I was at Black Caucus and they were like, oh no, that's too divisive. And look, right now they want to take away Black history. And I'm like, uh-huh, yeah, we should have set these up. I know they're doing it in Florida, but I mean, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a book, Demon Cottonwood. It's a novel, but that book that you mentioned, it walks you through that story about the opiate addiction, and it kind of shows how folks who are in abject rural poverty, living abject rural poverty in the United Statesian context is so dehumanizing, um, as you're witnessing yourself being made fun of by the people that are also residents of your own nation state. Like there are people who have not taken it upon themselves to understand the structures of disempowering union organizing that was taking place in Appalachia. All of those physical labor jobs were like farmers, like, all of the physical labor jobs in the South had moments of union organizing. And Fanon talks about the role of union organizing because there's a fundamental level of political education that goes along with that process. Um, and I think that one of the things that the Dems got wrong back when they decided that the rural communities weren't worth spending any money in because they were just always go conservative. They weren't paying attention to the numbers and the realities of those folks' story is a really close parallel in terms of like wealth gaps and health gaps and all of the things to bring them in under the tent. I think was a huge missed opportunity for the Dems. But then again, they're functioning like the native elite. They think they're going to build the world first, and then they'll let those folks come in and be their low wage workers because any way you slice it, capitalism cannot prop itself up without exploitation of labor and natural resources. Its imagination is limited to that script. And so when we're thinking about those folks who are in the United Statesian context, who have these moral objections to progressive issues like queer identity, trans identity, immigration, and we just automatically say those folks are not, we're going to cut our losses on folks like that. All you're doing is setting up more and more masses for the opposite side of the revolution. So one of the memories I had when I was reading was like, like MAGA is kind of following Fanon's playbook. Like they kind of like Like, they're like, look, the numbers, if we want the math to math, we can go and give the people who are completely discounted by all of the educated people of their own nation and give them a little bit of charity. It doesn't take much because, like, when you already feel like no one in your country cares about you, it doesn't take much for someone, especially someone in power. Like, one of my friends sent me this. She's actually from Appalachia, and she sent me this thing, and it was this comedian making fun of folks. It was Dave Chappelle making fun of folks, rural folks in Ohio. And I know she was sending it to me to be funny. But I responded, and I'm not like, I do have a sense of humor. Y'all see me laughing all the time, but like, I was like, it's actually not funny to me because I think about like, if I were a person living here in Jamaica, this is my country where I was born, and by circumstances beyond my control, the political elite had constructed a system by which my generations of my family were only ever going to live in poverty, then yeah, I'd probably go with the people that are like, we want your family to not be in poverty anymore. Like, even if that's a lie, I'd probably choose those people. And I feel, I think because I'm from a very, very like, when you all come and visit me down here, you'll see, not in this house, because this house is in a tourist area, but where I'm actually like from, you'll see that it's like, I was telling Amara, like, you had to like boil the water, like, to like have hot water. Like, it's like the real deal Holyfield, you know? And so when you're living like that, it's not inconceivable or hard to understand why folks would hopscotch over people who may look like you and be talking about some abstract like political vision for the future that you don't see any evidence of in your reality. And someone who has power, has wealth, is winning at life, telling you they can give you the secret. I mean, that's why the influencers are all rich, right? Like, people are buying whatever the influencers tell them to buy because they tell them they have the secret to getting 1 million followers. People are buying it. And so if we put ourselves in the techno-feudal realm, we're all natives. We're all the have-nots. We don't have any power over these satellites or how much the internet's going to cost tomorrow or how stable it's going to be or whether you're going to go black on the if your access is going to go black in 5 minutes. We have zero control or power over that. And look how quickly so many of us will do the biometrics, or we'll get the app on the phone, or we'll let AI type notes from a meeting for us because it helps us, right? Like, we're doing the things that we're turning up our nose at other people doing it in the physical realm about. And so I just wanted to point that out, that we're actually seeing Fanon's words being like very prophetic, very prophetic. It's just that the bad guys, the people we don't agree with, the people we don't like, are the ones who got to the masses strategically first, and we didn't. And so we gotta sit back and really think about the lessons learned from Vietnam, from Cuba, from Venezuela, and from Appalachia, about what it looks like to bring the masses along your political vision. And 2025 is a 40-year-old project. We know that CNN and the birth of 24-hour news cycle, if we track what's happening with the far right extremists, the white supremacist Christian nationalist movement, it like dovetails with what happened in the 80s, which also dovetails with what happened with immigration policy, dovetails with the North American Free Trade Agreement, which brought a lot of folks out of their nations of origin into the United States and created an immigration problem. But all of those things were rooted in, what does America have? All of the production has been outsourced. The only production we still have right now is agriculture. And a lot of the maneuverings and the manipulations of getting markets for our agricultural products to be dumped on so that other folks can't have independent economies. We're a part of the colonial empire when we're thinking about creation of market as opposed to creation of incentives to get what farmers want to grow to feed the communities that they live in. Because I think that's what all the farmers I know are most interested in, is feeding the people in their own backyard and not shipping it across the world to destabilize another country's economy. But that's how these policies are directly connected to our agricultural policies, how they're connected to the ways in which low-income farmers that don't benefit from or see any of that because they're not growing commodities, they're trying to grow specialty crops. Those folks are still functioning within the colonial paradigm. Like the entire way that our Farm Bill subsidy program functions is a colonial paradigm. And so when we think about it like that, when we think about technology like that, when we look at Fanon talking about in chapter 2, we can't be random. We can't put all of our energy in one project, and we can't just be throwing stuff up, throwing our energy, everything that pops up, throwing our energy there. We have to be coordinated. We can't confuse strategy and tactics. And we have to kind of slow down and realize like, hey, I'm a Black person living in the West. My labor, my land, my natural resources have been stolen by colonizer. I can't be functioning like colonizer. My metric of success can't be what colonizer has. And I don't even need to be thinking about colonizer. I need to be thinking about capital for the rural masses, getting the basic needs met of the rural masses. Because if those are met, then that's a completely different revolution than one that is abstract and that farmers and rural people can't participate in until it's already a finished product. That was a whole lot of lecturing. Any questions, comments, concerns? I see Selena posted, after working in land food for 7 years, I read this book right after the Texas winter storm in 2021 when our electric grid was down. I quit my job in 3 weeks and started tilling the soil of our family land, started growing food and medicine there, and divested from the city. Within a year, I moved full-time on our family land in 2022. This book literally moved me and believe the rural agrarians are deeply connected to land-based practices. It's definitely complex and layered to be in community with my ancestors and extended cousins. I've been in an unlearning state and remembering my place. Too much to put here. Grateful for the convo and your take. Oh my gosh, that was a whole word. Thank you so much. Wow, 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 wow. Your goals, your goals. Maybe one of these sessions you're gonna have to teach a course for us, Selena, because that's goals. That's my aspiration. And I'm grateful that you're here. Any closing thoughts? We're right about at time. I want to just open up for any closing thoughts, comments, questions that folks may have. The next session will not be next week, but it'll be the following Wednesday. Next week, I'll be at a reparations conference.
I just have one last thing, and then I'm going to be quiet. I was just thinking, and I know there's been ongoing since maybe the 80s when Reagan was in office. You know, we had this big explosion of, puffy sleeves. Even fashion follows, economic trends. But I think the reason why we have so many Republicans now that are not really Republicans, and I've said this many times before, they finally got an invitation to go to the country club, even though they can't afford the country club, but they feel like they're in the country club. And that's why you have so many cult like MAGA people, because they're invited to the country club now. They can't afford it, but they're dangling in front of them and they feel like they're a part of something greater than themselves. Which might. Then I'm going to be quiet.
I completely, no, please don't be quiet. I completely agree with that. And excuse me, I see it a lot in, one of the things I've been invited to speak at a couple different conferences in the coming weeks. And one of the things that I've been talking to with the organizers of these events is, we really have to start telling Black farmers and other, farmers of the global majority, the truth. Like, to get into ag and make a living, to make enough for you to work and not have off-farm income, or a partner without off-farm income, or a co-op of people with someone who has off-farm income, we have to stop framing that as a possibility. And maybe it's a possibility if you inherit your land free and clear, and it already has the infrastructure in place, and you already have a line of credit that you can tap into and access. But the labor cost of just getting your infrastructure put in place, and you're not going to have enough volunteer work days to get a full farm up and running. Like, I love all the new and beginning farming programs that have been out there, but some of the farms that I've visited as a part of the tour, it's like folks don't want to leave those farm incubators because the cost of infrastructure, and even just to have your land, like you cannot make a United States standard of living income on land as a small farm. Like, I want us to start telling that, to start owning that, because I do think that's where solidarity philanthropy comes in. I do think that's where, the Black Church Food Security Network and efforts to organize, the Black Greek organizations, and all of the community aid and food bank infrastructure that we have. Like, most of the farmers I know want to just grow food for their community. But one thing that we have to start telling folks is, to make money off of a farm, you have to function within the colonial framework. And that means exploiting labor or exploiting land, usually both. And then, are you actually practicing any form of liberation or independence when you have a mortgage note? Absolutely, Jude. Like, let's debunk the myth of entrepreneurial farming, instead advocate for growing food as a community service. And that's why, like I was saying last time, like, we should start functioning like we're a newly liberated nation. Like, think of yourself as like a recent post colony, and you're participating in building a new world from the ground up. But if your metric of success is what the opulence of the colonizer, like, you're going to crash out. Like, it's impossible. And I want folks to think about, what are the other relationships we can have to land that don't perpetuate extractive labor practices, because we don't really have a formula for that in the US. That said, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really, really grateful to see all your faces, all the comments, all the hearts, all the 100%. And I will see you not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday at 5 Eastern. And until then, stay safe, carry your passport everywhere you go.
You're so
And I love
funny.
all of you. Bye. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Safe travels.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Be careful.
Be safe.